Okay, so let me make, I know you guys are on Shul tomorrow, so let me make an organizational point about Chayei Sarah. Right, there's a point made by Yoni Grossman, I think noticing it as a structural point is actually quite important. If I asked you, where does the story of Avram end in Chumash, where would you say?
Chayei Sarah.
So, you'd say, presumably when he dies, or whatever, right? I mean, Chayei Sarah is still part of the Avram story. I mean, Avram is definitely involved. He is, right? Chayei Sarah starts off with the death of Sarah, and then with Avram appointing Eliezer to find a wife for Yitzchak. So he's definitely involved. But when you actually think about it, it seems like the Torah wants you to feel like the end of the Avram story is really where? Akedas Yitzchak. The real end of the story is Akedas Yitzchak. What would lead you to think that the end of the Parsha is Akedas Yitzchak? The end of the story is Akedas Yitzchak for Avram?
Because, it just ends with him going back home. And it's really the end of his, tests, so to speak.
Right, meaning you would say, thematically, it's the end of his tests, it's the climax of Avram's challenges. There is also a literary reason to believe this, which is that Akedas Yitzchak borrows language from Lech Lecha, which does seem to indicate that we're finishing a unit. Right, so you get, most strikingly, right, in Pasuk Bet already, Vayomer Kachmat ben Yichidcha asher ahavta et Yitzchak, v'lech lecha al eretz ha'moriah v'alev sham la'olah al acharim asher amar elecha. Right, lech lecha to the place that I will show you. Right, meaning you do. Right, there is a sort of literary close to the fact that now we've reached lech lecha 2.0. Right, so there's a literary reason to believe that this is the closing of the Lech Lecha unit. There's a thematic reason to believe that this is the closing of a unit in the sense that this is the climax of Avram's life. Now, it's not true that Chayei Sarah is therefore not about him in the sense that it's about somebody else, but more likely, structurally, it's what we would call, in English we would call it a coda. Maybe that's not fair. It's a transition period. Right? Meaning it's a transition period. Meaning, yes, Chayei Sarah is about Avram, but it's about the death of Sarah, how he deals with burying Sarah, and
getting Yitzchak over.
Right, meaning it's Avram's focus on making sure that Yitzchak is married so that Yitzchak can take over. Right? Meaning it is about Avram, but it's not Avram in terms of Avram's own life anymore. Right? Meaning Lech Lecha and Vayera are Avram as, let's say, an Av, right, as the main character, the main protagonist in the story. And then Chayei Sarah is about Avram's transition, right, his ending, sort of tying up loose ends from his life and making sure that there will be a next generation. And therefore we should think about this not quite as Avram's story anymore, but as the transition to Yitzchak. Now, I think this is an important point. First, I think it's a fair description of what's happening in Chayei Sarah, but it also is helpful because it highlights the fact that who really doesn't get a story at all in Torah?
Sarah.
No, Sarah does actually get quite some press time. Who barely gets any time, though, at all in Yitzchak? Right, the Yitzchak gets basically no time at all in Tanakh. Right, meaning Lech Lecha and Vayera are Avram's life. Chayei Sarah is what could have been a story about Yitzchak, but is neither a story about Yitzchak nor really a story about Avram. It's about Avram ensuring that Yitzchak will continue, but that's basically all of Chayei Sarah. And by the time you get to Toldot, who's Toldot about?
Yaakov
and Esav. Meaning Yitzchak is just a character that gets duped in the context of that. Right? We have very few stories that are actually about Yitzchak. Basically, the only story we have about Yitzchak is Yitzchak repeating the Gror story. Right, where he goes back and he has a fight over wells again with Avimelech, and right, that's about the only story we have that is unique to Yitzchak. Right, again, I want to highlight how strange that is. Right, that Lech Lecha and Vayera are Avram. Right, Toldot is already Yaakov, and Chayei Sarah is basically a transition parsha where Avram ensures that Yitzchak gets married. It's not really Avram is the main character; it's just sort of whatever, and like Yitzchak himself gets almost no press time. Meaning, someone showed me on Erev Shabbos. Or maybe it was Shabbos for me already. I saw it Motzei Shabbos on Facebook in response to a different question I asked, that Ibn Kaspi has this interesting theory that the amount of press time you get in the Torah indicates how important you are, and therefore his conclusion is that Yitzchak is not important. That like the heroes of Breshit are Avram, Yaakov, and Yosef, and that Yitzchak is just relatively speaking just not as important, which you don't have to agree with his conclusion to realize how odd it is that descriptively that is a fair read of just the number of psukim that everybody gets, right? Meaning, how do Chazal actually describe Parshat Chayei Sarah? Right, if you want to understand how striking it is, right? Chazal describe Parshat Chayei Sarah as Yafesi Chatan Shel Avdei Avot Yoter Mitoratan Shel Banim. That we learn from Chayei Sarah is that the conversations of the servants of the Avot is more important than the Torah of the children, because more time is given to Elazar's speech twice over, once when it happens and once when he repeats it, then you get to most of Torah, right? So it's not even just that Yitzchak gets no press time, it's that Eliezer gets more press time than Yitzchak in Torah. Now, part of that is because Yitzchak is, in many ways, that is his identity, right? Like, that is his identity, is a bridge figure, right? Not in like a negative way, but that, sort of the positive words about Yitzchak, which there's a lot of truth to, is that what Yitzchak does well is make sure that Avram's legacy is solidified. Not everybody can be a groundbreaker, because then nothing will ever have staying power. What gives it staying power is certain people who are willing to live not in the limelight, are willing to say, my job is, to make sure that the legacy of the previous generation just actually settles and takes hold. I mean, at a certain level, that is Yitzchak's heroism, right? That's what's emphasized. He is, in the good sense of the word, a transition figure, meaning he makes sure that, right? Remember, if the reason Avram is chosen is because he has a message and he's able to convey it to his children, the fact that Yitzchak manages to actually learn the lesson, follow Avram's path, make sure there's another generation, is testament to the fact that this works, right? That is an important role. The other thing that maybe Zev remembers from last year is that I'm not being completely fair, because if I read Chayei Sarah from the vantage point of the Avot, what I said is mostly true. But it's not true if I realize that there is another protagonist in the story who does get a lot of press time and is very active and is very heroic in Chayei Sarah, and that is Rivka, right? That is Rivka. That Avram and Yaakov both have Lech Lecha moments, literally, right? Meaning Avram leaves, Ur Kasdim, Haran, all that stuff. But Yaakov, the Torah makes it that artificially he ends up retracing Avram's steps, right? He's kicked out just to come back, right? Meaning he literally has to go through that. That's how important it is. Rivka actually goes through that, right? She has this, she's offered, do you want to go to join the family of Avram? Do you want to follow, literally, geographically, the same physical process as Avram? She says yes, right? And she is this active character who's making that choice, who's leaving her family, right? I mean, that's the emphasis of all these psukim in Chayei Sarah. Her family asked, do you really want to go with this man, right? Can we stay another 10 months, another year? And the answer is no, I'm just going, right? I'm just going, right? She is that figure, and part of the story is, yes, Yitzchak is a transition figure, and that's his greatness, that he solidifies Avram's legacy. But part of it is that there is also an Avram-esque figure here, and that is Rivka. And that's sort of what Chayei Sarah highlights, is that there's an Avram-esque character in this generation. It's just not Yitzchak. It's Rivka, right? And the combination of Yitzchak and Rivka, and this actually, descriptively again, if you look at Bereshis, makes sense, because of all the female characters in Tanakh, the one who gets the most active press time, both in Chayei Sarah and in Toldot, right? Meaning here, she's the one who chooses to leave and do whatever, and join Avram's family. And then in Toldot, where she's the one pulling the strings and making sure that Yaakov does what he needs to do, and etc. That is Rivka. And perhaps the message, right, there's that two levels. One is that, yes, Yitzchak is a transition figure. The second is that, but every generation really does need the actor and do it. It just doesn't have to be the man, right? It's just not always the man, right? In this case, it happens to be Rivka, right? And it's the balance, Yitzchak, which also makes sense, because Rivka is poised to be the Avram-like figure because she doesn't grow up in Avram's house. It is a choice for her. Yitzchak's great. If Yitzchak, right, to put it sort of comically, right, Rav Kook, as the apocryphal story goes, and I don't know whether it's true, but this is the apocryphal story, that a full-out kofar, right, those old-time, really, really kosher mahadran kofrim, or pasul mahadran, whatever you want, once went to Rav Kook to be provocative and said, I named my sons Korach and Nimrod. Just whatever. What? Yeah. And he said, what do you think about that? Like trying to get a response. And he said to him, look, if your father, who was a good frum Jew in Europe, had named his sons Korach and Nimrod, I would have been upset, because that would have meant rebelling against Torah. But you are a kofar l'mahadrin. If your son rebels against you, I'm totally fine, right? Meaning, you don't always want someone to be, right, rebelling. It depends what they're rebelling against, right? Avram had to rebel because he's living in Ur Kasdim, he's living in Haran, he comes in Terach's house. Rivka has to rebel because she's living in the house she's living in, right? We wouldn't want Yitzchak to be that character. I mean, his greatness is that, right? Everybody has a sort of rebellious side to them. They want to mark their own territory. And for someone to say, you know what, my father was actually really good, right, and I'm just going to continue his legacy, is actually a sign of strength. And coming back to the one story we do know about Yitzchak is that, right, he goes through the same motions with the whales, except, and this may be his identity in a nutshell. What's the difference? He succeeds. He has peace, right? He actually, right, he doesn't have all the problems. Returning to the previous generation's issues, repeating it, and just sort of, smoothing out the edges and making sure that the imperfections that happen in the generation of, revolution, and making sure that we smooth it out so that it can be passed on the next generation, is also a quiet heroism, but is a very different type. And that seems to be the complex dynamic that's going on in Chayei Sarah. Okay, we'll talk again on Wednesday, Thursday. But